Hey friends, this is the Miss Volfie from our half-acre homestead. Let's make another homemade gift from the heart. Okay, so what I have here is a pair of towels that I got at the local store. Now, they're all nice and they've put a ribbon on them and all that. But you know what? I want to personalize them. And you're going to need about a half a yard of fabric that will go with the towels, preferably with a nice print, and a corresponding solid color, and I'm using white. You're going to need some tissue paper, a rotary cutter and a ruler, and a sewing machine and an iron. Let's get started. Okay, I've gone ahead and ironed my fabric. Now, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure this band of fabric because we want to cover this and we need to make our strip wider. So, this band is almost exactly 2 inches. So we want our finished band to be at least 3 inches. So we're going to take our fabric here and fold it. This is where the guy who invented the rotary cutter has my absolute wonderful thanks. Now you want this as even as possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my fold is on a line on my cutting mat here. That's why there's a grid on it. I'm going to make sure it's squared this way, and then I'm going to cut off this edge so that I have a nice even cut. Just like that. Now, I know I said 3 inches, but that's the finished band. We're going to cut our fabric into strips. And when they're sewn together, they're going to be smaller than what we cut. So we want each strip to be 1.5 inches wide. Now remember, we have 2 towels and there is an end to each towel. So we're going to be making 4 strips. So, when I have all my fabric strips cut, we'll be back. Okay, now that I have my fabric strips all cut, we're going to sew them together. Now folks, it really doesn't matter how big the seam is that you are going to sew between your 2 fabrics, as long as every seam that you make after this first stitch point is the same. I use these lines on my sewing machine to measure. And if you're smart, which I'm not all the time, you will pin your fabric together so that it is exactly the same all the way down. At this point, I'm just going to put a pin in the beginning so that I start it off right. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the fabric run level with the outside of my presser foot. And I'm running the fabric right on the out edge of my presser foot, and that's the measurement I'm going to use all along of sewing all these strips together. And because I have more white fabric than I do of this floral, I'm going to do the other side of this strip in white again. So when I have this other strip sewn on to here, we'll be back. Okay, I've got all my strips cut and sewn together, and now I'm going to lay them seam side down and press them flat. Now folks, if you don't think you need an iron, then don't pick up quilting or sewing because, well, let's just say I have 2 irons because they're indispensable, especially if you want a really crisp finish on your project. So when I have all these strips ironed out, we'll be on to the next step. Okay, now that our strips are all pressed and ironed, we want to make these into cubes, this center piece, and that is now 1 inch wide. This is a 1 inch strip. So giving a 1/2 inch for seam allowance, we're going to cut these pieces into 1.5 inch strips. Now remember folks, if you're going to do a set of towels, like hand towels as well as the matching bath towel, remember your hand towels, that band along the towel is probably not going to be as wide as on the bath towel because the bath towel is bigger in itself. So you're going to have to adjust your measurements accordingly. Now, if you don't want to spend all day cutting up these strips one at a time, go ahead and pin several together so that you can cut them as you go, or cut several at once. Now be careful to put your pins this way because this is the way we're going to cut. And be careful when you do cut that you know where your pins are. And I just go about every 8 to 10 inches along down. And we're going to continue to cut these. Now, you may think a pile this big would be big enough, but it's not. And I'm going to show you why later. But make sure you have piles and piles of this stuff. When you think you have enough fabric strips cut out, make 2 more. Because, trust me, you're going to need it. I don't have measurements for this stuff, folks. I just wing it. So all I can give you the measurements for is the sizes that I am cutting. Okay, I've measured the width of my towels, and my towels are, for this project, 29 inches wide. I'm going to need 22 for each end of the towel. Now, what we do now is, before I sew these together, I want to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take these and I'm going to flip them right sides facing. But instead of sewing them together, being as I just cut them apart, it wouldn't make sense, I am going to put them together and then I'm going to slide one over just until the white folds meet. Can you see that? Where these white folds meet. And I'm going to put a straight pin right there. Oh, if it'll go through. Okay, now, still using the outside of our presser foot as our measuring guide, I'm going to sew this. This is the way it's going onto the machine. And I'm going to sew it beginning, because this is the way you want it, the shorter end facing outward, and the top is the longer end. But we're going to start sewing on the outside of our blue block. And when you unfold it, this is what you have. Okay? I'm going to do another one just to show you. I'm going to lay my piece here like this until the whites butt up against each other. I'm going to put a straight pin down through the blue seam where the white parts meet. See, the underside piece is shorter and meets up with the outside of the blue. We're going to put it on the machine, and starting on the outside of the top piece, your top piece is longer facing outward. We're going to start on the outside of the blue, and the fabric is only going to butt up against the outside of my presser foot, and we're just going to stitch just past the top of the white piece. Cut, remove our pin, and this is what it looks like when you unfold it. Of course, it has to be pressed, okay? Now, when you have all of your pieces sewn together, this is what it looks like, okay? And like I said, my towel is 29 inches wide, and it takes 22 of these pieces to make a 29-inch width piece. Okay, so now I have my 4 strips of these, and I've pressed them out. I've cut out 8 strips of this gingham. What I'm going to end up doing is putting this blue and white gingham on either side. And to start that, I'm going to take this end and I'm going to cut across from corner to corner where the blue points meet the white, just to square up the end. And again to the other end. Now I'm going to do this with all 4 strips, folks. Corner to corner. There we go. All right. Let's put this away. Okay. So I have the end of my fabric here, and I'm going to take my strip of gingham and I'm going to lay it where each piece of overlapping white fabric ends. So we don't want the point to be visible in the blue. We want to go up just where our white fabric overlaps. And we're going to put a pin right through that section. Right here where this piece of white fabric overlaps the white piece before it. We're going to take our gingham, and right where those two cross, that's where we're going to put our pin. And we're going to do this all the way down. And it is really important for the finished product that no matter what the gingham says, because it looks awkward sometimes because of the way it's cut, it's really important when you're making a pattern with fabric to make sure your cuts are precise. Okay, now that we have our gingham pinned to the one side, we are going to go and sew it by putting the presser foot. We're going to sew using the outside edge of the presser foot as our guide by lining it up along the gingham. Okay, I've taken the pins out, and now we're just going to fold this back and we're going to press it into place. As you can see, by pinning the gingham above where the point meets, I've allowed myself the seam allowance so that I'm not completely cutting off all the tips of the blue. And now I'm going to take another piece of my gingham. I'm going to lay it on here, and I'm going to pin it where the white ends on the white in the overlap. Not where it meets at the blue, but above, giving myself an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, and then I sew. And once your second seam, your second bit of gingham is sewn on, we fold it back and press. All right, so when I have 4 of these done, we'll be back to attach them to the towels. Okay, here's all our strips. Now, we're gonna cover this section, this woven section of the towel with our strips, so that it'll kind of look like this. And how we do that is, for starters, this is where the tissue paper comes in. Because sewing terry cloth, when you run terry cloth through the sewing machine, the bobbin side will catch on any kind of loops in your terry cloth. So we put down tissue paper underneath the edge where we're going to be sewing. This is where it's going to be coming through with the sewing machine. So we put tissue paper down just to protect that side when we sew it. And then afterwards, when we've sewn our part on with the sewing machine, we can just tear the tissue paper off. So now what I'm doing is, we want it to be this way, okay, when it's finished. So we're starting at this very upper edge of where the loop terry cloth meets the woven pattern. And we make sure our tissue paper is under that as well. And we are just starting at one end, leaving a little bit, if you need to, overlapping the ends. And right where the terry cloth meets the weave, we're going to pin. And we're going to pin all the way through the fabric and the tissue paper. And this doesn't have to be a Christmas gift, folks. This can be, if you really want to impress somebody with a wedding gift, you'll buy a set of towels with the hand towels and the face cloth, and you'll make a set of these. Okay, I've finished pinning this on, and we're gonna sew it on. Now, part of this is, I'm not gonna lie to you folks, part of this, if you want it really, really nice, is going to be hand sewn with invisible stitching. Again, using the presser foot as the guide for the gingham, we are going to sew this to the towel. And of course my thread's loose. Okay, now let's take our pins out. All right. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the towel over, and we're just going to take off the tissue paper. See how easy that is? And now we're going to flip this back over, turn our iron on, and we're going to press this down just so it's nice and crisp, because we still have to sew this. Alrighty. Doesn't that look lovely? Now, I suppose if you wanted to, you could fold this side under and sew it with the sewing machine. But I don't want to sew it with a sewing machine because I went to a lot of trouble to make sure that the stitching on this side doesn't show. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fold the edge under. We're turning this edge under a 1/4 inch, and we're just pinning it in place. Make sure your points on the underside are not visible. We want this end turned under too. That's why I said, if you can, leave a little bit. But if you can't leave a little bit, this towel has an edge as well, and it's okay to leave that edge showing. It may seem fussy, but it's a way of taking a relatively inexpensive set of towels. Like I said, if this is going to be like a wedding gift, you go ahead and spend, you know, the $40 or $50 or $60 for the set of towels. But this, no matter what you do, a towel is still a towel until someone takes the time to make it a personal treasure. Okay? So when I have all the edge pinned and both ends, we'll be back and I'll show you how to do the invisible stitching. Okay, our fabric now has been turned under and pinned and pressed down. Let's get on with the invisible stitching. Now normally I would do a single thickness of thread, but I want this to really, towels have a tendency to be roughed up a lot. So I don't want this falling apart. We're going to start at the corner where the machine stitching ends and our stitching begins. And I'm going to go in under here. Now remember, this is the machine stitching, but I want to start where it left off. And I want my knot to go in underneath. Where this thread has come out, you're going to go back under where the thread came out, go through and very carefully go along the fabric with your needle and pop it up at the corner. And you want your needle to be very close to the edge so that we don't have big stitches showing on the fabric. Then we're going to go back through. Let's turn this now because we're working along here. We're going to go in where the stitch came out, but on the fabric underneath, through and along towards you, and then up through the edge of the fabric. We'll take that pin out because it's confusing now. See, you don't see the stitch. If you go back through, the stitch has come out of your gingham. We're going back through the towel. It has come out of the gingham, but we're going to go into the towel, making a short stitch towards you, and then pushing it up again through the gingham. And pull. You can't see the stitches here. See? I'm going to show you a little bit closer. It's come up through the gingham. We're going to go underneath it into the fabric below, push the needle through the fabric, through the middle of the fabric, and pop it back up at the edge of the gingham. Can you see those stitches? If you look really, really close, you may be able to. So that is how I'm going to finish sewing our decorative border on our towel. It's a bit fussier than going along it with the sewing machine, but then the sewing machine stitches will show. All right, so when I have all 4 borders stitched on, we'll be back and I'll show you the finished product. Okay, the towels are all done. Here is both ends of one towel, and here's how it looks folded up. Aren't they lovely? And I know just the cousin I'm going to give them to. This is the Mrs. Volfie from our half-acre homestead saying it may have taken me a couple of days, but this gift was really worth the effort. Take care. Bye-bye.